Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton here in the New River Valley of Virginia. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. Recently returned from Savannah, Georgia for the Sky Astrology Conference #3. So we finally got the third one in the books after a major interruption. So that was really nice. I dreamed of when Pluto first entered Aquarius, I dreamed of eagles on February 1st when I look back at my dream journal. And then when I got back home yesterday, I was out on the New River. It was a beautiful, sort of like early spring-like day. And I went down to the river to my happy place, my favorite spot where the water is just mesmerizing. And I looked up and the moon was in the sky and there was an eagle circling right there in my happy place. I was like, wow, very sweet. So I know it's been a couple of months and I know that people, especially in these times, can tend to worry about others when they don't hear from them, but I am fine and things are good. I think Eagle to me represents the invitation or confirmation of a higher plane of consciousness, basically. And so I feel like maybe the dream was an invitation, and maybe seeing the eagle on the way home was a confirmation of having passed through some kind of initiatory portal. I mean, that's pretty much the way I build it to the attendees at the conference. Um, and I think that's pretty much the way it turned out. So very happy about that. The eagle flew off and went up on the other side of the river into the hills up there, the mountains, the cliffs, and landed in a tree. And I was like, ooh, I wonder if he or she is nesting up there. So that would be sweet to have an eagle permanently residing in my happy place. I'll definitely be bringing the cameras and trying to get some photos. For those of you that follow my social media and stuff, I'm usually posting photos of the sky, but eagles qualify. So you'll notice here that I have a picture from Alchemy um, background. And the theme of this Venus-Mars conjunction that's happening right now, to me, is this Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage of the inner masculine and feminine, what Jung called the anima and animus. Regardless of whatever gender you identify with or biological sex you're equipped with, these two things exist within all of us. We have a masculine and feminine nature, and they need to be balanced. Really, this is present in many religious traditions, but for instance, in the Native American medicine wheel, the idea is that, you have the different directions that represent different powers or different consciousness, but that the idea is to reside in the center. The center is where all things are possible, you see. And so this adjustment between these two natures is what I believe the Venus-Mars conjunction is about. And so I'm going to share with you a little tidbit. I mean, I gave really 4 separate talks, an entire day of teachings on the Venus-Mars cycle. So I can't possibly share all that with you here on this. And that's really not the point. The people who, you know, made the trek to go through that portal with us there in person, that was for them. And I'm not releasing the recordings to the public for that reason. But this will give everybody a little taste of what we did there and a little taste of the ideas and some things going forward to to kind of put a frame around this idea of this Hieros Gamos, this sacred marriage, or this inner balancing of the masculine and feminine. Okay, so let me share my screen here and we will talk a little bit more about a few things. So as I say, this is a recapitulation of just a small part of the material that we did there at Sky Astrology Conference. The recordings from the original Sky Astrology Conference are available to my members. My members get access to my archives, which contains recordings from like a couple decades of my professional career now. And so you either have to sign up for the conference or you have to sign up to be a member if you want to get access to this sort of stuff. Um, but yeah, here's that background that I created, for some content for the podcast. This idea that the red king in alchemy and the white queen, that they represent these, and to me, they represent the most the core of our being, the most intimate, the most essential parts of our being, because um, Venus and Mars are the planets closest to Earth, and they're two of only three planets that are capable of penetrating the what astronomers call the astronomical unit, which is, I mean, like a really sterile medical terminology, but to me, it's like the heart space of our system. It's the only place in the cosmos we know for sure contains life. And Venus and Mars are the planets that penetrate this enclave, this holy of holies, if you will. And being our closest neighbors, to me, they represent the closest, most intimate parts of ourselves. The deepest structure in the Jungian map of the psyche is the anima or animus, the inner masculine or feminine, is deeper than the shadow. The shadow is sort of the gatekeeper to the anima or animus, in my understanding of it. And so this union with this deepest part of ourselves creates a beautiful, you can see there's like a beautiful flowering that comes out, and there's a child inside the alchemical vessel, and there's this beautiful flowering and a crown that comes. So this represents the higher awareness that comes when we're able to realign and balance these um, fundamental parts of ourselves. This is a photograph. Oh, another thing that's really interesting. I learned how to hide this bar at the conference. Somebody was like, hey, can't you hide that thing? Let's see. Um, yeah, hide floating meeting controls. There we go. So you can see here are Venus and the moon reflecting over the Atlantic, and then down here in the left-hand corner, you can just barely see Mars. It was a real challenge to see Mars. And in fact, we didn't actually see him with our eyes on in this picture. It was later when I got the camera and I was like, oh my God, he was there. This is slightly, I think this is about 70 millimeters, which is 50 millimeters is about the way things look to our eyes. So this is just slightly telephoto here. And that's probably why Mars showed up to the camera and not to our eyes. Um, and then here's another one with Mars there in that lower strata under the beams. It's a very interesting, you can see how shallow of an angle the ecliptic, by drawing a line between Venus and Mars, there's a very shallow angle of the ecliptic here. And so if the ecliptic is vertical, the distance between the sun and the horizon is greater than if the ecliptic is shallow, because the sun is closer. And so Mars is still under the beams here, even though it's more than 20 degrees elongation from the sun. So, this is like the archetypal measure for the heliacal rise of a planet is 15 degrees, but in some cases it may be actually further before we can physically lay eyes on it. And this is one of those cases. Saturn, on the other hand, in the evening sky, we saw very clearly, even though it less elongation from the sun because the ecliptic is vertical in the evening this time of year. So that was a really interesting observation. This one. I mean, the thing I'm most proud about this photograph is that I was teaching holding space, right? Like I was sort of being the leader of a group, holding space for people to gather around. Also teaching, like for instance, about that the ecliptic and where they might look in their bodies to find this energy, so on and so forth. And I was snapping photographs all at the same time, which is new for me because, when I get into my photography mode, sometimes it's like, very engrossing. It's hard to multitask. And same way with teaching or even holding space. Sometimes holding space is its own deal and teaching is its own deal. And it's nice to have someone kind of holding space while you're teaching, for instance. But I was able to do all three at once and it was easy actually. And I was like, that's pretty, that's kind of like Hieros Gamos. I was pretty proud of myself for being able to do that. I didn't even realize I did it until I was doing it until after I did it. If I had realized that I was doing it, I probably would have been like, but fortunately, it was just a happy accident that it all came together. So there's a really interesting part of the Venus-Mars cycle that comes from Ruperti, who was a disciple of Rujar. Um, his book Cycles of Becoming is a classic. I mean, absolute, gem of a book, even though, obviously there's ways it could be improved on. Um, but Ruperti lays out this 77-month cycle, which is about 6.5, 7 years. And he says, look, the main thing you need to pay attention to is that every fifth conjunction of Venus and Mars happens where Venus is retrograde. Um, and that this happens in a period where there are 3 conjunctions within about 9 months. So there's this sort of gestational window, and the middle of the 3 conjunctions is the one he's telling us to pay attention to. And it works out very well in my view. This is what the cycle looked like for about 200 years, literally just like clockwork. Every 5 conjunctions, you can see I'm counting them over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for those of you that are just listening to the audio, forgive me, but the visuals can be found on YouTube. So think about tuning in over there as well if there's anything missing. And I'll do my best to illustrate with my words. So yeah, so for 200 years, the cycle is like clockwork: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then it gets kind of weird. It's interesting also that studies have shown quantitative correlations, that being like, so-called statistics. There's two types of statistics. Um, one is frequentist and another is what's called Bayesian. So I'm talking about a frequentist correlation to the so-called 7-year itch. And, a lot of people would associate that with like a quarter Saturn cycle or a quarter progressed moon, various things. But Venus Mars makes the most sense in terms of relational dynamics. And Ruperti suggests we look at this by house. Just look at what house this middle conjunction of the three is happening in your chart. Now, the interesting thing is that at some point, this pattern that Ruperti identifies falls apart. In fact, in the 50s, we begin to see this pattern fall apart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's 3 conjunctions, but the middle one is not with Venus retrograde. In fact, it's with Venus stationary. So how does this change it? Well, it inaugurates a 100-year segment of the cycle, so a 300-year cycle overall that I call the epoch of Venus. And this is a whole nother part of the talk that I went in depth on, and I wrote and I also wrote a 2-part essay on that I can't really go into here, but where this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pattern gets very erratic, and the triple conjunctions might occur after just 1, 2, 3, 6. That in one point they completely disappear. And so there's this other part of the cycle that Robert Blaschke first turned me on to that's very different, and that's the part that's from about the late 1940s through the 2040s, or at least into the 2040s that we're in. And to me, these two different parts of the cycle very clearly represent Venus, like stability, phi, the golden ratio, very strong, very, very beauty, harmonious, and Mars, like erratic, all over the place, Um, but in either case, what's interesting is that whether retrograde or stationary, the middle conjunction of these 3 is characterized by the faster planet passing the slower one. Sorry, the slower planet passing the faster one. And it brings up this idea in alchemy that the goal of alchemy is to make the fixed volatile and the volatile fixed. So wherever we have something in our life that is too habitual, too unconscious, we need to shake that up so that we pay attention, look at what's going on. Is this really what you want? If not, make an adjustment. If so, just be more deliberate about it, I suppose. And make the volatile fixed. If there's something in our life that's sort of a pipe dream and we keep talking about it, but we're not doing anything about it, we're not making it real, bring that down into a more fixed state, you see. And so there's that adjustment between above and below, as well as masculine, feminine. There's the various dichotomies that will be adjusted in this process. And here we have the difference between a faster planet and a slower planet being inverted. And so I think what Ruperti tells us to pay attention to this middle conjunction still holds true in the second part of the cycle, although the nature of the second part of the cycle, I think, is very different. I think it's the nature of Mars, the part of the 300-year epoch that we're in is of the nature of Mars. But this middle conjunction remains the one to pay attention to. It's interesting also that this cycle that Ruperti laid out, it correlates, you can see it in the sky. It starts in the morning, and then it goes through the middle of the Venus M that we call, and then it goes to the evening sky, and then it comes back around. And so the retrograde conjunction will be the one that is closest to invisible, and then it will mark the transition from evening back to morning, which represents the transition of a new day and therefore a new cycle. You see what I'm saying? Evening to morning. And so so this 9-month gestational period with these triple conjunctions is really important. And that last happened in February of 22. Okay, well, it happened from July 21 through March of 22. The middle of the middle conjunction with Venus stationary was at 17 Capricorn on February 16th. And you can see here, if again, it follows. So this is a morning sky conjunction followed by a bit higher one, and then this one is actually the one where we are now, number 3 in this 5 conjunction process. So even though we're having a conjunction at 6-7 degrees Aquarius, you should be very aware of this 17-degree Capricorn point in your chart, because this is sort of like the foundation point of this larger cycle that we're moving through. And I think that you will see that if you go back, there will be Capricorn themes. There's another reason for that too, which we're going to look at in a minute. As well as the 7 degrees of Aquarius. So now that we've got the bigger picture, let's zoom in a little bit to this 6-7 degree conjunction. It's happening just after the sun leaves Aquarius. Mercury's still in Aquarius, and of course, Venus and Mars will have moved past Pluto by that time. Today, Venus is entering Aquarius, where it will meet with Pluto and Mars. Mercury and the sun are still in Aquarius, so there's this big, and the moon will trine them from Gemini as well. So there's this really big emphasis on the air element. And in the tarot, the air element is the Fool. So it's interesting about that, and I'll get back to that in a second, but there's this sort of heavy emphasis on the air element right now, which is interesting because, and I'll just go ahead and talk about that. This conjunction is also happening in the near about the same degrees where the near about the same degrees where the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurred. Okay, so I need to take that. There we go. So let me share with you what I was talking about with the tarot. Just I posted this on my X Twitter account, so I'm just referencing a post that I made there. You can see here that the air element and the letter Aleph in the Hebrew alphabet are associated with the Fool in the Golden Dawn system. And so this idea of Aleph being the first letter, not only in the Hebrew alphabet, but in many alphabets, the Fool represents a new beginning. So there's this, it's like the conception of the concept of beginner's mind. There's an invitation back to a fresh perspective that is being, to my mind, is being invoked by this Aquarius conjunction. And we can kind of see that if we look at the progression through the tarot cards that correspond to these two signs, which are Capricorn and Aquarius, correspond to the devil and the star. Okay, and in between them is the tower. So what's interesting about that is that the Capricorn represents sort of closed structures, hierarchical structures, where you have to have some kind of membership card to get in. These tend to be the way humans have organized themselves forever, probably because it's the way monkeys organize themselves. There's these very, strict hierarchical, often hereditary or principles and then so we set up these structures, and then the characters in the card, notice they have chains around their necks, but they're very loose fitting chains. They could take them off and leave, but then they wouldn't be able to be on the inside of the Capricorn structure anymore. They would be on the outside. And those on the outside are Aquarian. Okay. Now, so this idea that Aquarius is about brotherhood and sisterhood, I mean, in the sense of it's it's sort of solidarity between exiles, yes. I think it is about brotherhood and sisterhood in that respect, but it's not. I think people think about it in terms of like, because they think about Aquarius in terms of groups, which is really an 11th house association. They think, oh, it's like groups tend to be Capricornian, actually. I mean, and so um, there's actually this sort of, you know, abandonment and or breakdown of the structure, the Capricornian structure that has to happen. That's the tower. Before you can get to the star card, before you can see the light of a star, you have to, for instance, leave the light pollution of the city. And the Venus is a notable exception in the moon, but if you want to see Mars, you got to get outside of the city. I guarantee you that. And so, yeah, there's this sort of beginner's mind that comes with the Aquarius and really air placements ideally in general, but with Aquarius, it's mainly because they have left behind the closed system, the dogma, and the false, the casting out of the false authority is one way I've heard the tarot, the tower explained. It's the casting out of a false authority, and all authority is false at some point. It has to be, because it outlives its usefulness. Authority um, is only genuine in as much as it's useful and serves the interests of everyone in that circle. When it stops doing that, people leave, and then the structure crumbles, because it's basically a pyramid scheme, and when the people at the bottom start to leave, the thing tends to crumble. So there's this sort of walking away, or a violent overthrow that can happen in the tower. But either way, these sort of rigid Capricornian structures have to be either revised and so to allow new people in, or new energy in, right? The boundaries become too exclusive. There's no new energy, and so the system kind of implodes. So it has to be revised in order to allow new energy. Otherwise, it just becomes corrupt and decay. You see? So there's that. When we look again at the dignities involved here, and the degrees, the sort of almutin of the conjunction, if you will, it's very interesting to me that this decan is ruled by Venus. And in fact, this conjunction, which I think is the exact conjunction is 657. So it falls just within the bounds of Venus as well. So Venus is the decan lord and the bound ruler of this conjunction. And so Venus has a bit more sway in terms of like our Hieros Gamos. We need to think about rebalancing the masculine and feminine, with maybe a bit of consciousness that the territory we're in is Venusian ruled, you see. And though it's very much Saturn ruled, primarily Saturn ruled. And Saturn, as the triplicity lord of uh, the day triplicity lord of air signs, Saturn represents the heuristics, the shortcuts that we need to navigate reality. But I think the problem that I see many people struggling with is that the shortcut is not the truth. Shortcut is not reality. Shortcut is not the rules, the Capricornian structures that we exist in give us various rules, give us dogma. The dogma is not the truth. It's just a shortcut to make things easier so we can all agree. You know, a stop sign, for instance, is yes, it is the law of the land. Um, but a stop sign in that sense, you know, it is like something that we've all agreed on. There's a social contract. You know, if you, when you get your driver's license, you're going to stop at the stop sign. You know, same at the same time. Yeah, if it's a right turn, a lot of people might do a rolling stop, whatever, right? You know, you see what I'm saying? So there's like a more fluid way of reading that signal that would be more like Mercury, like a more nocturnal, you know. If it's night or early morning and there's no one on the road, you might kind of roll through there. You see? So Mercury as the nocturnal ruler of says, hey, there's a more fluid way of reading these signs and signals. And to me, that represents like where, and Mercury being the sort of intermediary between opposites, tells me that it's in the nocturnal reading of things and in the nocturnal space, that is the inner space, where this Hieros Gamos is most available to us, because there's so many restrictions on the way we think and act in the daytime. You know, if you roll through a stop sign in the daytime, you might get a ticket. Yeah, usually they'll give you a warning if you haven't been, bad lately. um, but it's there for a reason. It's there for people's safety, but it's not, in other words, it's not reality. You know, before there were stop signs, you used to just squeeze the horn, oh God, before you got to the crossroads, right? I mean, there has to be something, but it's not, it's just the latest structure that we've all agreed on to, right? It's not an absolute, in other words, you see, but I think people, they make the mistake of thinking that these structures and the dogma associated with these structures are absolute. They're not absolute. They're just shortcuts. They're just the latest shortcut that we've all agreed on. And now that doesn't mean you shouldn't obey it. Once again, if you don't, you might get a ticket. You might hurt somebody. There are situations where it's kind of understandable where you might also, though, like if you're going to be honest, how many people haven't rolled through a stop sign once in a while? And so that's kind of the sort of background influences that hold sway over this degree, and therefore this conjunction, and therefore the way that we go about this balancing of, if you're thinking about it in terms of objective, daytime reality, Saturn ruled reality, where there's all these restrictions and it's going to be difficult to really make big time adjustments. I think it's going to be more difficult to make if you're thinking about it in terms of a nocturnal environment where there's more flexibility in your thinking, and you open up to possibilities than the actual truth. You see, because these Saturnian restrictions that we sometimes they're bullshit. Sometimes they are literally lies. Like if you think about, remember in the movie Star Wars where it's a famous scene, Darth Vader says to Luke, no, I'm your father. And Luke says, but that's impossible. I have a meme about this that I like to troll the astronomers with, where I say, astrologers, Darth Vader, I am your father. And astronomers are like, no, no. But that's actually the truth. You see, that's the truth. It's one they don't like, but it's the truth. They try to, make it like we're the redheaded stepchildren, but like we're actually your daddy, yo. um, anyway, the reason why Luke says that's impossible is because he was lied to about his past for good reasons. People lie for, the road to hell is paved with good intention, but it's a lie nonetheless. It's bullshit. And so what does Darth Vader say to him next? He says, search your feelings. You know this to be true. So you see, he's telling him, forget what you've been told, go within and and search for the truth in your instinctive emotional body. There's a very different truth that might be accessible there, you see. And the truth is that he was his father, and as difficult as that might be, sometimes we get the truth from villains, you know. Um, Look, I'm not a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for the man, but he got a few things right, and definitely got a few things right. Now, you might say, well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut, and that's true. But at the same time, crucially here, when you get into these absolutes, right? Oh, it's a stop sign. You must stop. And Trump is, whatever. So he must be wrong every single time, every time he opens his mouth. Well, that's ridiculous, number one. And number two, there might be crucial information that you miss out. Well, that's impossible. You see, we might be telling ourselves, restricting ourselves from options because we're saying, well, that's impossible, when in fact, the truth is more weird than we are prepared to accept. You see? So sometimes the villains can be the source of truth, which is very deeply ironic, but it's life. Now, this face, no, no, so I was talking about the triplicity rulers there. The bound ruler, as the bound ruler, um, bound's dignity is about setting the terms of the situation. So as the bound ruler of this, Venus would say, if I, like agreeing to all parties agreeing to the framework of nonviolent communication, for instance, would be a way to mitigate the more Martian influence, and to sort of, it would be a kind of bias, but it would also be a kind of way of setting the terms to where there's a more Venusian possibility. So Venus being the bound lord here, it does suggest that that the rules of engagement might be more Venusian, and that we might need to make an adjustment within that background of like, okay, the basic terms of engagement here are Venusian. Yes, we might still need a little bit more Mars, but how can we turn up the Mars on the volume on Mars while still doing that within the terms of agreement that are more Venusian? And that's difficult for Mars, but that's what happens when Mars is in Venus's signs like Libra and Taurus. Mars is forced to slow down in Taurus significantly. Mars is forced to think in Libra, and not his first reaction in either case, but necessary adjustments. Now, in terms of the decan ruler, in the Golden Dawn system, Like the 2, 3, and 4 of any element, any suit relate to the cardinal sign. The fixed sign is the 5, 6, and 7 of that suit. So in this case, air is swords. So the Aquarius decans are 5, 6, and 7 of swords. So Venus rules the first decan of Aquarius as the 5 of swords. And this famously in the Rider Waite Smith portrayal is like a scene where there's a cat picking up some swords, and there's some swords laying on the ground, and this is typically thought to be the aftermath of a battle. And so I'm gonna take you to tarot.com because sometimes their interpretations are just really good. And off the cuff, I'm probably not going to improve upon it. So I'm just going to share that with you. Yeah. So I'll just read it here. Traditionally, the 5 references the grim and sobering process of cleaning up the battlefield after a conflict. The war as a whole has not been won or lost yet, but in this skirmish, there were grievous casualties. This card admonishes the loser to study carefully what went wrong so that a new strategy can be devised and more setbacks forestalled. I would probably add that it loser or winner, it that strategy needs to be looked at. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? It's kind of like halftime of a football game. Both sides are going to be making adjustments. There is a need to regroup and rethink the game plan, discover your blind spots and weak links, and take corrective measures before getting back into the field for another round. So here you see again, where's the blind spots? Well, Luke didn't know really who his father was, and so Darth Vader had a tremendous advantage on him, knowing his blind spot and trying to play on that, you see? And so that's what we have to be careful on guard about, is that these blind spots or these assumptions, these shortcuts that we have all agreed on, they will be used against us to get us to just sort of react to life instead of actually thinking about things. That's what heuristics are. They're a shortcut to do what? To less thinking. And so if we actually, slow down, it's a Saturn ruled sign, and go, okay, wait a second, let's go back and think about this a little bit. It's gonna and if and most of all, if we're willing to accept the painful realities. Carl Jung famously said that the basis of all mental health is the unwillingness to accept genuine suffering. And so if we're willing to accept the painful realities, like, oh my God, Darth Vader is and like, that's all of us, right? But Darth Vader is our father. We grew up in the so-called patriarchy or in this colonial thing, or however you want to, like, yes, there's negatives to capitalism. There's negatives to a constitutional republic. There's negatives to the nation state being the dominant. There's negatives to everything, but there's also positives as well. But, essentially Darth Vader being what, basically the devil in this. Yes, we are all children of the Capricorn structures within which we're born, but we have the ability to free ourselves from that as well. But again, freeing ourselves means being willing to go through this journey from taking the chains off, breaking down. The tower doesn't have to represent ultimate destruction. what it represents is the breaking down of the dogma. I remember when I had my Chiron return, I had this awful dream where um, I was, basically my father had died and we were putting him in the crematorium. And then um, I locked the door because there was this guy with a big key and he handed it to me. So I thought, okay, I'm supposed to lock the door. And then we go around and next thing you know, there's this, there's this screaming. I was like, oh my God, what did I do? I thought about that dream for a long time. And I was like, the father metaphorically is Darth Vader. It's the dogma. And so when I locked the door, I was like, I'm not gonna let you off the hook and just say, okay, maybe next time we'll change something. No, I'm gonna burn this stuff and I'm gonna see what's the truth. Because if it survives that fire, then it's worth keeping. So that's kind of like the alchemical process of calcination. Like you burn off the impurities, you burn off the lies, you burn off the bullshit. Where where did the failures of this most recent battle reflect a failure to see the truth? No matter how inconvenient, harsh, or otherwise unacceptable, it's still the truth. You see? Um, so so yeah, that's kind of my take on this part of it. Um, and so it's a difficult placement, but with Venus being the ruler, I think that um, it shows that again, it shows this quality of the air Venus, like in Libra, this ability to balance, this ability to put values first, like, okay, you know, what am I trying to do here, and how, and what are the core values that I'm trying to achieve, and like how can I do that with the least possible pain and suffering? Um, and that sometimes that's peace, sometimes it's not. Um, Sometimes peace is not possible. Um, but sometimes it is, and people are telling us it's not, right? So I won't belabor that anymore. Now, in terms of the actual sky, it's interesting to note that this conjunction actually happens in the body of the constellation Capricorn. Um, it's in the neighborhood of Beta Capricornus here, which is also known as Dabi. So in terms of the Persian lunar mansions, we're looking at the 22nd lunar mansion, which is known as Al-Sad al-Dabi. This is a screenshot from the online version of Christopher Warnock's book on the lunar mansions, which I find very helpful. And all of these little books that he does, they're so great. I mean, a lot of it is just excerpts from like Agrippa and Picatrix or whatever, but the fact that it's all put in one place is really valuable. Um, and I'm looking at the sort of what he calls the constellational, that is vis-a-vis the original marker stars for which this is one really obvious example. Al-Dabi is named that because it's based on the star Dabi. Now, if you were doing this tropically, you'd be in a very different section of the zodiac than where the star Dabi is. So I choose to go with the constellational ones. Um, but there's this interesting, it's a very interesting, I don't know that the two necessarily have to do with anything with one another. So it might just be what we would call synchronicity. But one of the things that Picatrix says this mansion is good for is the release of captives. So this mercurial figure is fleeing a situation where it was formerly captive. Well, what were we talking about? Like, we're all captive of the Capricornian structures to some extent. In my mind, that doesn't necessarily make them evil. It just makes them what they are. They're restrictive. They serve to exclude things. And as long as we don't periodically update them or update our understanding of them, we're like those people in chains. This is a very interesting example of like freeing yourself from that. So it's very Aquarian, even though it's in the stars of Capricorn, which is very interesting. Let me see if there's anything else in here that I wanted to point out from that one. Sometimes Warnock does something very interesting where he relates them in terms of a sequence of mansions. Let me see if he says anything about that here. Yeah, when the moon passes into the 22nd mansion, she has completed 3/4 of her journey through the mansions. So she starts another triple sequence, as well as beginning the last quarter. So you see there's like there's an interesting beginning here. Um, so so that's notable. Of course, this looks very much like Mercury in the image. This screenshot is from the Google Books version, which you can find on Google. Yeah, so Picatrix says it's good for curing illnesses, for servants and captives to flee, to cause goodwill between allies, and for captives to escape. Um, Also, it says it's good for binding tongues, which is kind of the opposite, which is kind of weird. So I don't know. Um, Personally, for me, like I stay away from any of that binding nonsense. Like that's black magic to me. So I'm gonna go with the escaping captivity uh, interpretation, which again is very interesting because it's actually very Aquarian in my understanding of Aquarius. And I happen to have lived my whole life with Aquarius rising. So now what's interesting is if we look at the actual stars, this is Pi Aquarius, also known as Oculus. So you can see in terms of, even though we're in this mansion that begins with Beta Capricorn, the star that they're closest to is Pi Capricornus, which is also known as Oculus. It's the eye of the goat. Venus Mars might be somewhere between the eye and the mouth in here, I suppose. Um, but it would be interesting to see, like when I think about Oculus, um, this idea of air having to do with like um, the mental structures that what we organize reality with, and like this quantum idea that simply by observing an experiment we can have an effect on the outcome. So like think about it, like what's the first thing people say to do if you're if you having trouble remember your dreams? Write them down, keep a dream journal, make a practice of remembering them. What are you doing there? You're observing them. It's like you're using the power of vision, like you're projecting your psychic gaze upon your dreamscape. You see what I'm saying? So this idea of gaze, which is often like given a hostile, is particularly the male gaze, is considered to be hostile and whatever. This concept of gaze, of course, is we can use that in many other cases, like where are we focusing our attention? That is this kind of gaze that we're talking about. And so where we focus our attention will have results. Um, and so it's interesting to think about like the symbology of like that eye and the all-seeing eye and so forth. And like this, it comes to mind because, in my dream, I saw an eagle and then I saw one in reality. So it's like, where is the symbolic reality of your inner unconscious in the more material reality of your lived experience, where are they connecting? That's a really good sign to pay attention that something's going on. And so I think Oculus might be speaking to that to some degree, like be aware of your ability to observe is like maybe the biggest tool that you have here, your ability to. And I would say, it's interesting recently, again on X, you know, I saw what's his name? The uh Gary Lockman. He posted this interesting article where he was talking about, the idea with science is that scientists are supposed to divorce themselves from what they're studying. So they're supposed to have this completely detached viewpoint. And yet, no matter how detached they try to, like the experiments are showing them, you're in this. You can't escape being part of this. And yet their job is to be as separate from it as possible. Well, he was talking about, hey, there was a guy, who was considered part of the scientific, revolution, Goethe, who said, hey, there's another way of seeing things, which is very participatory. In fact, it's like it's completely participatory, and there's almost this Hieros Gamos between that which we're observing and ourselves, to where we are. It's like he's almost like talking about where people talk about their animal communicators. Well, he was actually talking about plants. He believed that if he observed plants in a participatory way, that his consciousness could essentially commune with the consciousness of the plant. And so there's this radically different way of seeing that truth. The truth is, when we observe, we're part of what we're observing. There's two very radically different ways to handle that, right? And the alchemist believed, more like Goethe, that we should absolutely project our psychic contents into the thing, because they will be transformed as the stuff in the vessel is being transformed. That is the medium of exchange, that by projecting our consciousness into the physical container where we're doing the alchemical lab operation, then we're participating in that transmutation that happens inside the container. Our consciousness is being transformed at the same time that the matter is being transformed, you see? So there's a very different way of engaging the observational. You can do both, right? You can just keep track of your dreams and just kind of try to have a sort of objective view of like, okay, well, maybe that's not my father. Maybe it's just like some conception of father. That's kind of a more detached view. Um, but I had to really think about my own processes because what happened was I got off on this trip, and I got actually kind of angry about the way that things were, and that's when I realized, oh my God, you're doing it. This reaction that you're having towards this dogma that you don't think is right, this is exactly what the dream is showing you. This is how you burn the father by getting reactive against these overly restrictive things, and you're like, get these chains off of me. I want to see the truth. And you burn in the tower, you burn down the dogma, and everybody screams, because oftentimes, even when it's a false dogma, people are attached to it. And so no matter how many times I show them, hey, this is a much more accurate way of seeing things, they're like, they just go back to the dogma. Because it's like and people get upset. Well, how come you're so against the shadow concept of the retrograde? I'm like, it's not very useful, and there's some very serious downsides to it, but so anyway, there's a lot, I think, here in this Oculus that could be, and I'm gonna maybe be revisiting that. And in speaking of revisiting, there will be many opportunities to do that. Here's briefly before I leave you, here's an overlay of the various. Now, remember how we said the triple conjunction is the one that that begins the cycle? Well, in every Venus-Mars cycle, one of the Ptolemaic aspects will repeat. Every 6 to 7 years, it's the conjunction that repeats, but in the other cycles, it might be the sextile, it might be the square. In this case, it's the waning or applying, well, it's not applying, it's the waning or the, what's the other word? It's the trine that follows the opposition. It's in the second half of the cycle that is tripled in this case. So from January 25 through May of 25, we'll be in this extended trine because of the mutual retrogrades that happen at that time. So it'll be very interesting to see, like, okay, maybe even keep as if it's a dream journal. Okay, here's what's going on in my life, right now around the conjunction. Here's my thoughts about it, blah, blah, blah. Check back in around the sextile. Okay, here's where I'm at. Check back in around the square, the trine, the opposition, etc. This Hieros Gamos will be an ongoing process to some degree, that we can check back in on, particularly at the opposition, would be a really good, because it's pretty much Venus is within a degree of the original conjunction. Notice that she's at 558, so she's like 59 minutes from the original conjunction, and Mars is opposite that. So particularly in December, it would be good to check back in and say, hey, what about that thing that happened back in February, that Hieros Gamos? Where the hell have we gone with that? So yeah, that is about it for this time, I suppose. Thanks again for tuning in, and hopefully it'll be a little bit sooner before when I get back to y'all. Appreciate your patience. Sometimes in the middle part of the winter and whatnot, I get a little bit slow, and also I had the conference to prepare for and stuff like that. But I've been staying with my monthly reports for my members and subscribers. I'm working on the March report as we speak, and so even though there may not be a podcast, if you want to sign up for that, that's something that I do keep monthly, recurring, pretty much no matter what. I haven't had anything keep me from doing it so far. you know? God's willing and the creeks don't rise, as they say. Almost invariably, that stuff comes out monthly. So if you want a little more frequent interaction, you can think about getting a membership. You can also check me out on social media, where I'm a little more frequently active. I just posted something on Instagram yesterday about Draco and the alchemical process, which I think is very interesting. I'm going to be following up again on that in a few days. So check me out there. I'm on X, Twitter as well, and of course Facebook. So yeah, thanks for being here with me on the podcast, and hope to see you various places. At some point, I'm probably going to be doing another newsletter. Of course, you can sign up for that on the website. Any of the ways that you connect with me, thank you for doing so, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.